Okay, so part 2 of Candide. So go to the section on my notes about the Lisbon earthquake. So this was a real event that happened in 1755, and and I put there about like 30,000 to like 35,000 people died. And Voltaire was very moved by this, so much so that he wrote a poem about it that I put on canvas. So let's read some of it. It's quite long, so I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but it's good. it's it's sad. This is the idea that terrible things happen, and sometimes it's almost an insult or offensive to say to the grieving person who says, "Why did my baby have to die?" And you say, "Well, it was supposed to be that way. God wanted it that way." I've seen people become very angry by that, and I understand why. That's not an explanation. That's not a reason. All that you're saying when you say that is, I have no idea. I don't know why that had to happen. But you're also saying it was good that your baby died. And nobody is going to take that in a positive way. So when this earthquake happened out of nowhere and all these people, good Lord, 30,000 people? And okay, this is a few centuries ago. They didn't have 6 billion people on the planet at the time. That's a lot of people. It's a lot of people now too. But it was really a lot of people then. It is inexplicable. And people who survived, found their family in crushed under rubble. And so you say to them, this is the best of all possible worlds. It happened for the best. It was a good thing that your family members died like that. And it was right, and I'm glad it happened. I'm glad that they died because God wanted it that way. Yeah. That's awful to say or to think. And Voltaire certainly didn't think that way. So if you look on canvas, I'm going to read some of the poem. You see that it says, so the Lisbon earthquake is the title, funnily enough. And the subtitle, an inquiry into the maxim, whatever is right. So he's being sarcastic here. This poem is an inquiry into this notion that anything that is, that happens, that exists, is right and good. So that horrible rape and sodomy and torture of a 5-year-old girl by her father because he thought that she was not a virgin. Oh, and her subsequent death because of the torture. Oh, and the caning of her 5 years old. So I would assume that any 5-year-old would be a big slut and running around and having sex with everybody. Right. If she wasn't a virgin, it's because she was raped. So she deserves to be tortured and sodomized. Don't forget the sodomy. That's good, because it is. It is. It exists. It happened. It's right. That's the idea here that Voltaire is screaming out against. Because I have news for you. Just because it exists, and it is, does not make it right or good. Even if God exists, However it works, it doesn't work like that, even if God exists. So, let's see what he has to say in the poem. It's really a powerful poem. You know, he's an extraordinary writer, there's no doubt about that. O wretched man, earth fated to be cursed, abyss of plagues and miseries the worst. Horrors on horrors, griefs on griefs must show that man's the victim of unceasing woe. And lamentations which inspire my strain prove that philosophy is false and vain. Approach in crowds and meditate a while yon shattered walls, and view each ruined pile, women and children heaped up mountain high, limbs crushed which under ponderous marble lie, wretches unnumbered in the pangs of death, who mangled, torn and panting for their breath, buried beneath their sinking roofs expire, and end their wretched lives in torments dire. Say, when you hear their piteous, half-formed cries, or from their ashes see the smoke arise, say, will you then eternal laws maintain? Which God to cruelties like these constrain? Who is the God who would do this? Whilst you, these facts, replete with horror view, will you maintain death to their crimes was due? No matter how bad someone was, is the penance for their crimes this kind of death? And can you then impute a sinful deed to babes who on their mothers' bosoms bleed? And what about the babies bleeding on top of their mothers as they're dying in this earthquake? Did they sin? Do they deserve it? What is this punishment for? What did they do to deserve this suffering? Why is it good that this happened to them? Was then more vice in fallen Lisbon found than Paris, where voluptuous joys abound? Did Lisbon, was it worse than Paris, such that Lisbon deserved this earthquake and this tragedy more so than Paris? Paris is not known for being moral and puritanical, for crying out loud. So Lisbon somehow deserves it more. The point is, can you reason your way through this tragedy? Can you find a reason why it happened? No, you can't. It doesn't make sense. There is real evil and atrocity in the world, and trying to make sense of it by saying it's actually all good because God wanted it so is despicable. And when you think on it, you realize that that is not a reason at all. That is not what we should say, and it's not true. Even if God exists, God doesn't work that way. However God might work, it's not this way. Was less debauchery to London known, where opulent luxuries holds her throne? Earth Lisbon swallows, the light sons of France protract the feast or lead the sprightly dance. Spectators who undaunted courage show, while you behold your dying brethren's woe. With stoical tranquility of mind, you seek the causes of these ills to find. But when, like us, fate's rigors have you felt, become humane. Like us, you'll learn to melt. When the earth gapes my body to entomb, I justly may complain of such a doom. Hemmed round on every side by cruel fate, the snares of death, the wicked's furious hate, preyed on by pain and by corroding grief, suffer me from complaint to find relief. 'Tis pride, you cry, seditious pride that still asserts mankind should be exempt from ill. There's more. The awful truth on Tagus banks explore, rummage the ruins on that bloody shore. Wretches interred alive in direful grave, Ask it pride cries, good heaven, thy creatures save. If 'tis presumption that makes mortals cry, heaven on our sufferings cast a pitying eye. All's right, you answer. The eternal cause rules not by partial, but by general laws. Say, what advantage can result to all from wretched Lisbon's lamentable fall? You respond to all of this horror with, everything's right, all's well, all's right. These are laws that are put down by God. This will happen, and it's right and good that all of these things happened. But what advantage, what good do you see resulting here from this lamentable, that is pitiable, remorseful fall of Lisbon, from what's happened here, from this tragedy? What good, what advantage is the result? You tell me. You say it's good. Everything is good. This is the best of all possible worlds. Tell me what good. What overwhelming good is so great that it is worth this horrific tragedy? Are you then sure the power which could create the universe and fix the laws of fate could not have found for man a proper place, but earthquakes must destroy the human race? Will you thus limit the eternal mind? Should not our God to mercy be inclined? Cannot then God direct all nature's course? Can power almighty be without resource? Etc., etc., etc. Shouldn't the God that we believe in be a merciful one? One that wouldn't do this? Why is this the God that we're holding up as a God? I thought you said God was benevolent. So, all these things, you explain away all of these seeming evils by just saying, well, they're good because he's benevolent. We just don't know how. We can't seem to find out how, and it seems absurd to even try. The answer is not necessarily that there is no God or that God is not benevolent, but that not everything is caused by God. Things are caused by human beings, too. Now, not the earthquake, necessarily. But it's the point of it, that horrible tragedies occur, and many of them are caused by human beings. And we are not to just disregard them, to just shrug our shoulders and say that it's okay. We are to find out why it occurred, what is wrong with human beings, that they behave in cruel and terrible ways, and to make it stop. That is our duty. And the Enlightenment thinkers, Voltaire is just one. By the way, the philosophers, well, Leibniz maybe not as much, but Descartes, Rousseau, these guys, many of them were activists. Voltaire is not the only one. And Descartes and Rousseau are philosophers. Voltaire isn't attacking Rousseau, but he's certainly attacking Descartes as well as Leibniz. But they were all against slavery in particular. And Voltaire specifically was, he actually joined, let's say, anti-slavery groups and gave talks and things like that about why slavery is wrong and needs to be stopped and things. Let me just make this point, though. I love the Enlightenment, and I love the Enlightenment thinkers for a number of reasons. Even Leibniz. I still love Leibniz, despite the fact that, perhaps some of the things he said are worthy of critique by Voltaire, and that's fine. But the one thing that the Enlightenment thinkers were interested in equal rights for many different kinds of people, except for women. The one group for whom they did not care at all was women. And it doesn't follow logically from anything that they say about human rights and whatever else. And they said a lot of things about human rights, but somehow it never applied to women for them. Now, remember that what I said before, I mean, I think that we do have to maintain something like free will. So, yeah, if they didn't apply their arguments to women, it is their fault, and they can be blamed for that. But I also recognize at the same time that we are pushed in certain ways towards certain choices, and it requires much more effort when we're pushed towards certain choices not to choose those choices. And a lot of people, most of the time, we don't realize we're being pushed. And so these guys are all products of their environment. Of course they are. And this is 400 years ago. Women didn't have rights. Women were practically slaves. I mean, women around the world are still treated like this in most places in the world. And by the way, even in the United States, let's not get this idea that women have equal rights in this country. I mean, of course we don't. And nor do minorities either. So let's not even bother with that. But certainly we're better off right now. But, I don't blame these guys for being products of their culture. Well, what else are you going to be but a product of your culture, of your environment? And if you don't bother to reflect on the choices you're making or the beliefs that you have, or if you spend all your time reflecting on one set of beliefs and not on the other one, then I guess you're not going to improve as well. So, there's that. But I think my point here is that don't allow this to sour you. Any males or females out there who are interested in equal rights for the sexes, don't allow this to sour you against the Enlightenment thinkers. They were doing the best they could for their time, and I think that they were very progressive, and were it not for them, we wouldn't be here now, and we are direct products of the Enlightenment. We are not products of the Romantic movement, which is our next chapter that we'll be looking at. We're not products of Romanticism. We're not products of the Middle Ages. We're not products of ancient Greece in the same way. We are direct descendants right now of the Enlightenment. Somehow, despite all of the things that have come after, we have maintained primarily Enlightenment thinking in this culture, and that is extraordinary. So it's very important that we give them the credence due, and they do deserve quite a bit from us. Now, so as I've said about the poem here, the poem illustrates God's or nature's indifference or disdain, or even so, just indifference, or even further, his disdain for human beings, for being willing to do this stuff to us. And it illustrates Voltaire's belief that we cannot philosophize away, that is, find reasons for the evils common in the world. On 175, this is so great, the very top left-hand column, and so it's from chapter 5. So this is the earthquake, the Lisbon earthquake in the story as it happens. And at the very top, Candide had been wounded by splinters of flying masonry and lay helpless in the road, covered with rubble. So Candide is laying there, covered in rubble. I mean, he's hurt. So he calls out for help to Pangloss, who's standing there with him. "For heaven's sake," he cried to Pangloss, "fetch me some wine and oil. I'm dying here." "The earthquake is nothing new," replied Pangloss. "The town of Lima in America experienced the same shocks last year. The same causes produce the same effects. There is certainly a vein of sulfur running under the earth from Lima to Lisbon," which is absurd, by the way. Okay. Yes, and I love Candide's response. He's like, yeah. Nothing is more likely. Yeah, sure. He's like, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, good. You're so awesome, Pangloss. But can you please just help me? Will you stop talking, pontificating about this meaningless crap right now? I'm laying here under a bunch of rubble and garbage. Can you help me up? And of course, Pangloss says, likely, exclaimed the philosopher. I maintain it's proved. And he continues, Candide is like, yeah. What you're saying is likely true. Now, just help me up. He's just sort of trying to appease him so that he will stop pontificating and help him. And of course, Pangloss doesn't realize this at all. And he just continues on. He's like, likely? No. It's not likely what I say. It's true. It's proven. I'm right. And he just continues on with this. And then Candide passes out. And Pangloss is finally like, my friend, he needs my help. Oh, I better get down there and help him. So the suggestion here is that these philosophers who, these particular kinds of philosophers, who in the face of these horrible things happening in reality, just continue to say all this nonsense that is foolish. And even if they were really willing to say, well, we do have free will and it's not all God and there is evil, well, that's terrific, but maybe you need to stop staring at your books and talking to each other over your glass of wine while everybody around you is suffering, and get up and help them once in a while. I have degrees in philosophy, and I study philosophy, and it is a luxury, by the way, to do anything in school, because most people on the planet are too worried about, their babies dying to, study something or learn to read or even care. So it's a luxury, and it's specifically a luxury to study philosophy because there's a sense in which it doesn't directly translate to any kind of career, although here I am, this is my job, I'm getting paid for this right now, so obviously it can. But there's a sense in which it doesn't directly translate to a career. Of course, that's not why you study philosophy anyway, to get money, but fine. So, I spend a lot of my time and the last 14 years of my life with my nose in books. And you have to keep, and there's no, it's not like studying, I don't know, to be a vet or something where I have to have my nose in the books, but then I have to go and actually operate on an animal and try to save his life and help him. That's not required of me. What's required of me is to keep my nose in the books as a philosopher, as a student of philosophy, and to keep thinking. And there's a sense in which that keeps me in an ideal world rather than a realistic world, in a place that is completely divorced from what's actually going on around me. I try hard to keep up with, current events, but I try to keep up with the way that people are actually thinking and doing things and what they actually care about in the real world, so that I'm not so divorced from reality to such a degree that I turn a blind eye out of just ignorance to the suffering that is happening around me. And the suggestion here is that Pangloss and these other philosophers have ideas that are so out of touch with reality that they have not made this sort of very pointed moral step to not try to mold reality to fit their foolish philosophy, but in fact to have their philosophy be molded to what's actually going on in reality. and it's only this one group of philosophers that he's talking about. There are many other kinds of philosophers that are nothing like this, and they seem to incredibly reflect what's going on in reality. And they have something to say about this suffering and why it is not acceptable and how we can improve it. And that's the kind of philosophy that Voltaire is doing. Voltaire is certainly a philosopher as well as an essayist and a poet and everything else. And the kind of philosophy that he wants to do is what can actually help to make reality better rather than just something that is completely divorced from it. And that, if taken into account by large amounts of people, would make it worse. Because it would give us all a reason to turn a blind eye to suffering. Because suffering is part of the best of all possible worlds, and God wanted it. Voltaire thinks that we can improve that, and that we should, and we have a real responsibility to do so. So he makes philosophy like this about this stuff. So that's the difference here. And we see Pangloss is just completely out of his mind the whole time. He has no idea what he's talking about. Now, the garden metaphor. So at the end, and we're not, obviously we didn't read the whole book. You kind of don't need to. He's just beating you over the head. Every chapter is just more characters who've gone through more unfathomable horrors that don't make any sense. And it just keeps going on and on that way. So having just the few chapters that we have is enough to get the gist of what Voltaire is trying to do. And the last chapter is very significant. Finally, they are all so downtrodden that they're really, even Pangloss, who keeps maintaining these kinds of things, this is the best of all possible worlds and everything, even Pangloss is starting to sort of lose faith in that and lose his foolish optimism. So they're in the garden, and I've written a few things to consider about this. Remember that this idea that these optimistic philosophers are so divorced from reality, from what really happens in the world and why, or the fact that we have no idea why, but that it shouldn't happen. But in a garden, if you are a gardener, you can't just stick your nose in books and then go into a garden and have everything, all the plants come up successfully. Any good gardener will tell you that you have to get your hands dirty. You have to go into the garden for many seasons and figure out exactly what's required. A book may tell you, okay, well, the bees are there to pollinate and blah, 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 and you can learn all of the ins and outs of ecology and biology and whatever else it may be, but you're never going to be a gardener or a good gardener if you don't actually get in the dirt and make real empirical observations. Trial and error. The books can help you. They can put you on a good path, but you have to get your hands dirty. You have to look at what's really happening. There's no way to nurture a plant to grow if you don't sit there with it in the soil and see what it does. This is what we should really be doing. So somebody like Pangloss, who experiences all of these things, but just seems somehow not to let them affect what he thinks, is just crazy. And that's why he is not nurtured. He doesn't grow, and he isn't able to nurture anybody else. At first, Candide loves him. Pangloss is his great teacher, and he thinks he's so wise, but at the end, Candide doesn't respect Pangloss at all. Because all the stuff that he's been spewing, Candide has looked at the real world and paid attention and dealt with it. And he says, what you've been saying this whole time is crazy. It doesn't match up. And even Pangloss is starting to realize it. And because Pangloss wasn't doing that at first, he wasn't able to nurture Candide. He wasn't a good teacher. Candide had to teach himself because Pangloss couldn't do it. So, in the end, when they're in the garden, they do get a sense of optimism. Remember that Voltaire doesn't want us to just be pessimists like Martin. That's not the right way either. We don't want blind optimism, and we don't want blind pessimism. This suggestion that everything is doomed and everything is evil is just as foolish and naive as the idea that everything is good and perfect and right. Those extremes don't make sense in the real world. There are things that are good and wonderful and beautiful and worth fighting for. And there are things that are awful and worth fighting against. And then there are things that are just whatever they are. A wise person is able to distinguish between those things, but recognizes that there is always room for improvement, and that improvement can occur. So he maintains a real sense of optimism that is workable or realizable given the limits of the real world. So when they work in the garden, as I say, this metaphor illustrates this realistic optimism, not this blind, absurd optimism of Pangloss and Leibniz and so on. With hard work, we can grow in the 3 ways I've listed. So in body, as plants do. By the way, your bodily growth is stunted if you put bad things into your body and so forth. But with hard work, being healthy, you can grow in a way that is healthy. We can grow in virtue, in morality. And one of the ways to do that is by not putting unhealthy kinds of things into our lives, like bad TV and bad people, right? I mean, parents are always worried that their kid is hanging out with a bad crowd because they recognize that this bad crowd can legitimately, and often does, have an effect on the moral improvement of the child, on the moral growth of the child. Kids will do bad stuff if all the friends that they're hanging out with are doing bad stuff, right? So by not hanging out with unhealthy kinds of people, by not watching unhealthy TV, I'm telling you right now, it does not make me a better person to watch reality TV, which is why I don't even bother doing it. I'm not made better by that. It doesn't improve my sense of virtue or compassion or anything. It makes me a worse person. It makes me a superficial person. It makes me a person who is hateful and angry because you get into this character or that character or whatever, and you have all these ridiculous emotions that aren't even real for you because you don't know these people and you don't care and they're all acting anyway. It does not make me a better human being. Things that make me better are like real art, good friends, good conversation, good books, and those are the things that I try to put into my life, because I actually do care about not being a terrible person and not harboring all kinds of angry and hateful feelings. And those kinds of things don't help me on that path. So, but it is hard work. I don't even have cable. I mean, I couldn't watch TV even if I wanted to, which I'm fine with because I don't want to. But it's hard work because I want to just lay around and not put forth any effort too a lot of the time. But I don't. Life is too short, and I have a goal that, according to a Hindu or a Buddhist, would take me many lifetimes. So I don't really have the opportunity to waste my time on nonsense. If I'm going to waste time, then it's going to be hanging out with good friends and having good conversation. It's not going to be watching TV. And we can grow in spirit, and certainly this is related to the growth in virtue. So we can grow, we can improve, and we can live well, we can live better. But that takes hard work. So, and I'm not talking about money at all. Living well, certainly for someone like Voltaire, doesn't mean that you have a bunch of money. You can have plenty of money, but if you are somebody who is so naive and saying these ridiculous and horrible things, that's not living well, and you're not helping yourself or anybody else. And for someone like Voltaire, part of what it is to live well is to be a good person. And you can be a good person without amassing large quantities of money. So when I mean living well, I mean morally. And that's what people care about. So also then, it's of course important that it's a garden, and certainly the greatest garden metaphor perhaps is from the Bible, in the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden, of course, is the place where mankind starts out in the Bible. And in the same, and we see it at the end of this story, but the suggestion here is that finally, tending to the garden, they're going to learn real optimism. They're going to learn really how to nurture and care deeply for another living being if they want it to survive. So it's not going to be enough for them. I mean, they need the garden to survive. They have to live off of it. So if all the crops fail, it's not going to be helpful to just say, well, that's what God wanted. You have to actually find a way to make the crops grow, or they're going to die because they live off of the garden. So it doesn't, do you see how it doesn't work to just say it's for the best that nothing in the garden grows? Instead, Candide, if Pangloss starts saying that, Candide is going to come around and say, will you shut the hell up? It is not for the best. We need the garden to grow. Get back to the books, figure out what we're supposed to do, and let's get back out here and start planting again and use a different strategy. We need to make this work. We need to improve our gardening skills. We need to be better. It's not a consolation to say that it was supposed to happen that way and that it's really for the best. And that the best of all possible worlds is one in which their garden doesn't grow and they all die. That's not helpful. So what they learn from being in the garden is that they can flourish and improve, but it requires work. And it requires that we admit to ourselves that this is not the best. We are not perfect, and we have to change. And by the way, is Voltaire not giving us a warning? We need to change now, too, just as much as they did then. And we need to change in terms of the way that we treat the environment. I mean, our fossil fuels are nearly gone. This is not looking good. We have a lot of things that we need to change, and it is not helpful to just say, this is the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be any particular way. We need to make it good. It's given to us, and it's up to us to achieve morality and wisdom, and to use those in relation to everything else around us, so that we can make it something akin to the best of all possible worlds. But that's on our shoulders. That's our responsibility. It's not up to God. It's not up to nature. It's up to us to become great. But we can't do that if we just maintain this idea that there's nothing we can do and that everything is already for the best. So the garden then, just as it is the place of the birth of man in Genesis, so too is it this rebirth of these characters, of this way of thinking about things. It's a we're rejecting this previous notion from these philosophers of optimism, and we're starting with something new, something that will actually work. Hard work, keeping our mind on what's going on around us, on who we are, on who we should be, and what we should be doing, and how we can make all of it better. This is the rebirth of man. Okay, so hopefully Voltaire's hopes for us are something that you can take with you, and remember that all of us have room for improvement, and I hope that we're willing to put forth the hard work to do that. I am not sure what life is about if it isn't about this kind of striving to be better human beings. So, and if any questions about this, email me, or you can put them in that general forum. And remember that for those of you who are going to write your papers tomorrow, I know there are a number of you who will do that on Descartes. There are a bunch of questions that some other students asked in that forum already. Good questions, pointed questions, deep questions about the discourse on method. And I've responded to the majority of them as far as I can tell. So that is if you get stuck, maybe check in there first and you'll see some expanded responses to difficult ideas. Okay, so good luck on your papers, guys.